My wife and I went out to dinner with my son and his wife at an upscale restaurant on Mother's Day. My daughter-in-law looked the waiter dead in the eye and said something that made my blood run absolutely cold. My own son heard her disrespect his mother, and he just nodded. I kept eating in complete silence. But when the manager finally brought the bill, one single sentence from him made their arrogant faces turn completely pale. Before I tell you what happened that night, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is something you earn, not something you demand. My name is Eugene. I am 70 years old, and up until that Sunday evening, I truly thought I knew the boy I had raised. The restaurant they chose was Le Petit Chateau, the kind of exclusive downtown place where the lighting is intentionally dim, the plates are massive, and the portions are barely a mouthful. Aaron had picked it naturally. He sat across from us in his perfectly tailored suit, checking his expensive smartwatch every few minutes, as if simply sitting with his parents was cutting into his valuable billable hours. Beside him sat his wife, Megan. She spent the entire first half of the dinner physically turned away from my wife, Evelyn. Megan kept shifting in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her arms, leaning entirely toward Aaron, to create an invisible but very real wall between us. Whenever Evelyn warmly tried to compliment her outfit, Megan offered a tight, forced smile and immediately changed the subject back to their upcoming country club renovations. The waiter finally approached our table, with a polite professional smile, asking how we would like the check divided. Megan did not even look at my wife, the woman who had spent decades loving and supporting the man sitting next to her. She simply raised her chin, pulled out her gold credit card, and said in a voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to clearly hear separate checks, "And we are not paying for her." The words hung in the air heavy and sharp. I shifted my gaze to Aaron, fully expecting my son to correct his wife to stand up for the woman who gave him life. Instead, Aaron looked down at his half-empty glass of wine and simply nodded in agreement. He did not say a word in our defense. He let the disrespect stand as if it were a perfectly normal way to treat his mother on a day meant to celebrate her. I did not yell. I did not cause a scene or flip the table. Anger is a loud emotion, but true disappointment is completely silent. I slowly placed my fork down on the pristine white tablecloth. I looked at Aaron, studying the man he had become, realizing that the boy I raised had died a long time ago. He had traded his character for a luxury condo and a woman who viewed us as a burden. I turned to look at Evelyn, my beautiful, strong wife who had worked double shifts at the hospital just to make sure Aaron had the best tutors, was staring down at her lap. Her shoulders were slightly slumped. She folded her hands tightly together under the table, trying to make herself look as small as possible. The public humiliation was radiating from her, a quiet, devastating pain that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. She did not deserve this. She had cooked thousands of meals for that boy, stayed up late sewing his school play costumes, and cheered the loudest at his graduations. Now she was being treated like an unwanted stranger at a restaurant she did not even want to go to. I reached under the table and gently placed my hand over hers. I gave it a firm squeeze, a silent promise that I was going to handle this. As we sat there in the tense, uncomfortable silence, my mind drifted back through the years. Aaron and Megan thought we were just two old folks surviving on modest fixed pensions. They looked at my calloused hands and saw nothing but a retired laborer who spent 40 years sweating on the Baltimore shipping docks. They saw a man who still drove a 10-year-old sedan and wore the same brown winter coat every single season without complaint. They only saw the surface. What my son never bothered to fully understand, and what his entitled wife certainly never cared to ask about, was what I actually did with the money I earned during those long, brutal shifts at the docks. While the other men were buying brand new cars and spending their hard-earned paychecks on temporary comforts, I was quietly and methodically buying up commercial real estate. I bought empty lots when the city was struggling. I bought rundown warehouses and held on to them patiently until the big developers finally came knocking at my door. I built a massive financial empire in complete and utter silence. I paid for Aaron to go to the best law school in the country, without him taking out a single student loan, letting him believe it was a combination of lucky scholarships and our entire life savings. I never told him the truth because I wanted him to stay humble and grounded. I wanted him to understand the true value of hard work. But my protective silence had only given him a false, arrogant sense of superiority, and it had given his wife the pathetic illusion that we were somehow beneath her. Megan broke the heavy silence by letting out a dramatic sigh. She picked up the leather-bound menu again and began complaining loudly to Aaron about the exorbitant cost of her own appetizers. She whined that the truffle fries were overpriced and that the caviar butter was a complete ripoff, intentionally ensuring that the neighboring tables could hear her. It was a pathetic, calculated display designed to distance herself from her black in-laws, to prove to the room that she was the one holding the purse strings. Aaron just nodded along with her complaints, completely oblivious to the destructive path he was walking down. He gently patted her hand and assured her that his law firm had just landed a massive new client, so the bill was nothing to worry about. He was bragging, trying to inflate his own ego, while letting his mother sit in shame. It was in that exact moment that I realized my son did not need my protection anymore. He needed a harsh, unforgiving dose of reality. I looked up from the table and scanned the dining room. The waiter was standing a few feet away, awkwardly holding the leather check presenter, unsure of how to proceed after Megan's rude outburst. He looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. I did not break his gaze. I sat up perfectly straight in my chair, projecting the quiet authority I had kept hidden from my family for decades. I slowly raised my hand and made direct eye contact with him. With a single deliberate nod of my head, I gave him the silent signal. It was a gesture that Aaron and Megan completely missed, but the waiter understood immediately. The game of pretending to be a poor, helpless old man was officially over. The financial reckoning was about to begin, and they were not ready for it. The waiter hesitated, his hand hovering over the table with the black leather folder. Before he could place it down, a sharp voice cut through the ambient hum of the dining room. It was Mr. Sterling, the general manager. He was a tall, meticulously groomed man who rarely left his station at the front desk unless it was for a VIP. Tonight, he was walking briskly toward our table, bypassing the usual floor staff entirely. Megan immediately sat up straighter, adjusting the collar of her silk blouse. She reached into her designer purse, pulling out her gold credit card, with a practiced flick of her wrist. She clearly assumed the manager was coming over to apologize for the delay, or perhaps to offer a complimentary dessert to appease her loud complaints. She slapped her card onto the table, sliding it aggressively right toward the center to ensure her separate check was processed quickly first. "We will take care of our half right now," Megan announced, looking up at Mr. Sterling with a sickly sweet smile that masked her sheer impatience. "And please make sure the charges for the older couple are kept completely separate. We are absolutely not covering their portion of the evening." Aaron finally looked up from his smartwatch, shooting a quick apologetic glance at the manager, but he still said absolutely nothing to defend his own parents. He just let her handle it. I did not blink. I kept my hands folded neatly on the pristine table, watching the sheer arrogance radiate from my entitled daughter-in-law. She truly thought money was a blunt weapon you swung wildly to show people your perceived worth. I knew true wealth was a quiet, heavy anchor. Mr. Sterling did not reach for her flashy gold card. He did not even acknowledge her outstretched hand or her condescending tone. Instead, Mr. Sterling stepped smoothly around Megan's chair, completely ignoring her rude demand. He stopped directly next to my right shoulder, clasping his hands behind his back, in a rigid posture of absolute undeniable reverence. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect reserved only for the true owners of the establishment. The waiter immediately stepped backward, deferring to his boss, while the tension at the table suddenly shifted into something heavy and entirely unfamiliar to my son. "Mr. Hayes," the restaurant manager said, his voice loud enough to silence Megan completely. "It is an absolute honor to have you dining with us tonight. As always, the entire meal is completely on the house. We have already voided the ticket." Megan froze, her manicured hand still hovering over her credit card. She blinked twice, her brain struggling to process the unexpected words. "Excuse me," she snapped indignantly. "On the house, why?" I quietly watched her confusion rapidly morph into raw indignation. She simply could not fathom why a luxury restaurant of this high caliber would offer a free meal to a retired shipping dock worker. She assumed it was some sort of pathetic senior discount or local charity, which only offended her delicate sensibilities even more. She desperately needed to feel superior, and being associated with a handout was destroying the wealthy narrative she had carefully constructed for the neighboring tables. Mr. Sterling finally looked directly at her, his expression professionally polite, but decidedly icy. "Because Madam Mr. Hayes's commercial holding group owns this entire building. He is our landlord. He has legally owned this specific property and the 3 adjacent lots on this avenue for over 20 years. The manager then turned back to me with a warm, genuine smile. "Your continued partnership keeps our doors open, sir. Your money is never required here at any time whatsoever." The reality of that statement crashed down on the table like a physical weight. I had bought this very block back when the city was plagued by abandoned storefronts and shattered windows. While Aaron was in high school begging for the newest sneakers, I was attending city council auctions in my work boots, buying up neglected commercial parcels for pennies on the dollar. I took all the overtime shifts, saved every dime, and invested in the soil of this city. By the time this luxury restaurant group signed their lease, my holding company was already generating millions in passive revenue. Aaron choked violently on his glass of water. He coughed, slamming his linen napkin against his mouth, his eyes wide with absolute shock. He stared at me as if a stranger had suddenly taken my place at the table. He was a corporate lawyer who prided himself on knowing every detail of his wealthy clients' portfolios, yet he had completely missed the massive financial empire sitting right across from him in a faded brown winter coat. The illusion of his arrogant self-made superiority was shattering in real time, exposing the immense invisible safety net he had been walking on his entire life. All the color instantly drained from Megan's face. Her expensive foundation suddenly looked like chalk. She slowly lowered her hand, pulling her gold credit card back across the tablecloth, as if it had burned her fingers. She looked at her husband, desperately searching for an explanation, but Aaron was completely speechless. The woman who had just loudly refused to pay for my dinner was now sitting in a building that my hard work owned, eating food subsidized by my commercial lease. Mr. Sterling pulled a sleek black corporate card from his custom-tailored breast pocket and respectfully placed it directly in front of me. "For the customary staff gratuity, sir," Mr. Sterling said smoothly, handing me a heavy silver pen. Aaron finally found his voice, though it came out as a weak, pathetic croak. "Dad, you actually own this building in Swen." He looked absolutely and utterly terrified, suddenly realizing the massive magnitude of his own ignorance. Megan sat completely paralyzed, her mouth slightly open, the sheer embarrassment pinning her to her seat as the surrounding tables watched the power dynamic instantly reverse. I did not answer my son. I did not owe him a single word of explanation. I ignored the corporate card entirely and reached right into my breast pocket. I pulled out a thick money clip, peeled off 5 crisp $100 bills, and handed the cash directly to the stunned waiter. "Thank you for your excellent service tonight," I told the young man. "You handled an uncomfortable situation with complete professionalism." I stood up slowly, adjusting my suit jacket. I walked around the large table to my wife. Evelyn was looking at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, finally understanding the firm, silent boundary I was drawing. I gently took her hand, helped her up from her chair, and draped her coat perfectly over her shoulders. I treated her with the utmost dignity, entirely ignoring the 2 arrogant people sitting across from us, who had treated her like absolute trash. Without looking back, I gently guided Evelyn toward the front exit. I left my son and his entitled wife sitting in absolute breathless shock at a table they did not pay for, in a building they could never afford. The long financial umbilical cord was finally and officially severed tonight. As the heavy glass doors of the restaurant closed behind us, the real destruction of Aaron's perfect, fraudulent life was just beginning. The valet pulled our 10-year-old sedan up to the curb just as the dark sky finally broke open. A freezing rain began to pound the pavement, washing the gleam off the luxury cars lined up along the avenue. I tipped the young man generously, opened the passenger door, and gently helped Evelyn inside. The heavy thud of the car door shutting effectively sealed us inside a private moving sanctuary away from our son. The drive back to our modest brick home in the suburbs was shrouded in an absolutely suffocating silence. The only sound was the rhythmic beating of the windshield wipers pushing the heavy freezing rain away. The yellow streetlights cast long, moving shadows across the dashboard, illuminating the quiet devastation etched into my beautiful wife's gentle features. She stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar neighborhoods blur by, completely lost in a deep, agonizing current of maternal grief and profound betrayal. Evelyn finally broke. A quiet, ragged sob escaped her lips, tearing through the quiet cabin of the car. She covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably under her winter coat. She was not crying over the shocking restaurant bill or the flashy gold credit card. She was mourning the absolute lack of respect from the boy she had nurtured, protected, and loved unconditionally. The sheer magnitude of his public betrayal had fundamentally broken a sacred unspoken bond between mother and son forever. I kept my hands firmly gripped on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning ash gray under the strain. I did not offer empty platitudes or hollow comforts, because there were no words that could erase the indignity she had suffered. Aaron's silence at that restaurant table was not just weakness or embarrassment. It was an active, deliberate choice to align himself with a woman who viewed his own black parents as entirely disposable burdens. My initial sadness rapidly evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, highly calculated anger. Every single tear Evelyn shed in the passenger seat fueled a rising, systematic fury within my chest. I had spent 40 long years absorbing the brutal disrespect of the corporate world, so my son would never have to experience it. Now the very boy I had shielded from that harsh reality was actively inviting that exact same disrespect right into our family dynamic, without any hesitation whatsoever. "Where did we go wrong, Eugene?" Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking as she wiped her damp cheeks. "We gave him everything. We taught him how to treat people with basic dignity." I kept my eyes focused firmly on the wet road ahead. "We did not go wrong, Evelyn," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "He made a conscious choice tonight, and now he must face the inevitable consequences of that choice." I realized in that quiet moment that Aaron's complicity was the direct result of my own misguided parenting strategy. I had intentionally absorbed every financial shock, every setback, and every brutal struggle so he could effortlessly glide through his life. I thought I was giving him a beautiful head start, but I had actually removed the very friction required to build a strong moral character. My silent protection had inadvertently created an entitled monster who felt absolutely nothing for others. When Aaron was in college, I quietly paid off his minor debts before they could accumulate any interest. When he wanted to start his boutique law firm, I secretly leveraged my commercial holdings to ensure he secured prime downtown office space at a fraction of the actual market cost. I carefully engineered his success from the shadows, allowing him to boast about his self-made achievements at every family gathering. I handed him an empire wrapped in a neat little bow. He truly believed he was a brilliant, highly sought-after attorney whose sheer talent alone was paying for Megan's luxury lifestyle. He did not know that the massive corner office with the sweeping city views was heavily subsidized by the same retired dock worker he just allowed to be publicly humiliated. I had given him the ultimate privilege of an invisible safety net, shielding him from the relentless economic anxiety that plagues most young black professionals. Instead of using that immense privilege to uplift his community or honor his family, he used it to purchase an arrogant, completely fabricated superiority. I pulled our sedan into the driveway of our home, shifting the transmission into park. The rain was still coming down in thick, freezing sheets, matching the sudden chill that had permanently settled into my bones. For 40 years, my entire purpose had been to act as a sturdy, unshakable shield for my son. But sitting in the dark driveway listening to my wife's quiet sniffles, my primary objective fundamentally shifted. I was no longer a protective father trying to guarantee his boy's success. I was a seasoned businessman evaluating a severely toxic investment that required immediate ruthless liquidation before it caused further damage. I helped Evelyn out of the car, guiding her gently up the walkway and into the comforting warmth of our front hallway. I took her damp coat, kissed her forehead, and promised her again that everything would be handled appropriately. As she walked slowly up the stairs to wash her face, I stepped into my home office and firmly closed the heavy oak door. I sat down at my desk, booted up my secure laptop, and mentally prepared to dismantle the fraudulent life I had unknowingly financed. The time for silent generosity was completely over. It was time for a brutal financial audit. Suddenly, my cell phone screen lit up brightly in the dark office, vibrating aggressively against the polished wood of my desk. The caller ID flashed Aaron's name in bright, demanding letters. He was calling repeatedly, his panic clearly mounting, as the reality of the restaurant revelation truly set in. He needed answers, reassurance, and a way to quickly smooth over his colossal mistake before Megan entirely lost her mind. The illusion of his independence was actively collapsing right now tonight. I watched the screen flash with a barrage of incoming text messages. Megan was likely screaming at him in the passenger seat of their leased vehicle, demanding to know why he never told her I owned millions in commercial real estate. Aaron was scrambling desperately, trying to reestablish the financial umbilical cord he had just allowed his wife to sever so publicly. He was finally experiencing the sheer terror of absolute, unrelenting uncertainty. The phone continued to vibrate, sliding an inch across the desk with the sheer volume of his frantic back-to-back calls. I did not reach for the device. I did not feel even a single ounce of paternal pity for the man sweating on the other end of the line. I simply reached out, pressed my thumb firmly against the side button, and powered the device down completely. The glowing screen faded to a permanent, unyielding, silent black. The emotional cord between father and son was officially cut, replaced only by the cold, calculating logic of a landlord dealing with a delinquent tenant. I opened my secure email client and drafted an urgent priority message to my attorney, Jonathan, scheduling a meeting for exactly 7 o'clock the following morning. The long, silent financial freeze had officially begun, and Aaron's perfectly curated, arrogant little world was about to violently crash straight into reality. The heavy glass doors of my attorney's downtown office stood perfectly still as I walked through them at exactly 7 in the morning. The receptionist was not even at her desk yet, but Jonathan was already waiting for me in the main conference room. He sat at the head of a massive mahogany table flanked by thick, neatly organized manila folders. The aroma of strong black coffee filled the cold, sterile air of the boardroom. Rain still battered the floor-to-ceiling windows, a lingering remnant of the storm from the night before. I placed my wet coat on a leather chair and took a seat directly across from my lawyer. Jonathan had been my primary legal counsel for over 15 years. He managed the complex web of my commercial holding companies and knew the intricate details of my quiet empire. Today, however, we were strictly focusing on a single highly problematic tenant. "I received your urgent message last night, Eugene," Jonathan said, sliding a thick stack of printed financial statements across the polished wood. "I took the liberty of initiating a comprehensive background check on Aaron's personal and business accounts just as you instructed. The preliminary results are highly concerning. Are you entirely certain you want to proceed with a full audit of your son?" I did not hesitate. "He is not my son this morning, Jonathan. He is a massive liability." I picked up the first stack of papers, adjusting my reading glasses. The bold red numbers printed across the top margin immediately caught my eye. The sheer volume of outstanding liabilities listed on the very first page was absolutely staggering. Aaron and Megan were not just living slightly beyond their means. They were actively drowning in a catastrophic ocean of high-interest consumer debt, desperately trying to maintain an unsustainable illusion of extreme generational wealth. Look at page 3, Jonathan instructed, pointing a silver pen at the columns of data. They currently carry over $90,000 in unsecured credit card debt. That does not even include the predatory personal loans they recently originated to cover the wedding expenses. They are actively maxing out new lines of credit simply to pay the minimum monthly balances on their existing cards. The financial collapse is not a distant possibility. It is an impending mathematical certainty. I scanned the auto loan section, feeling my jaw clench. What about the luxury vehicles they paraded around at the restaurant last night? I asked, my voice dangerously flat. Leased, Jonathan replied instantly. Both the imported sports sedan and the luxury SUV are heavily financed. Furthermore, they are exactly 3 months behind on those lease payments. The financing company has already issued preliminary notices of default. Repossession is practically imminent if they miss another cycle. I sat back in the leather chair, processing the sheer scale of the fraudulent lifestyle my son had constructed. Megan had loudly complained about the cost of caviar at dinner, acting like she belonged to the elite upper class. Meanwhile, her bank accounts were functionally bankrupt. They were financing an arrogant, aristocratic facade with predatory loans, using borrowed money to look down on the very man who actually possessed the wealth they so desperately pretended to have. Just last month, Aaron had stood in my living room loudly bragging about his new country club membership and his massive success as a boutique attorney. I had smiled and congratulated him genuinely, believing that his law firm was thriving independently. I had proudly assumed my silent financial support was simply giving him a comfortable buffer to build his practice. Instead, my quiet generosity had been weaponized to fund a pathetic, hollow performance designed to impress complete strangers. Let us review the commercial lease agreement for his downtown law firm, I commanded, shifting my focus to the business portfolio. 3 years ago, Aaron needed premium office space to attract high-net-worth clients. I secretly instructed my holding company to approve his commercial application at a steep, unrecorded discount. My company absorbed the loss, effectively subsidizing his luxury corporate suite by $8,000 every single month. I gave him the keys to a kingdom he never actually earned. He believed his sheer legal brilliance secured the prime real estate, remaining completely ignorant of my hidden intervention. The lease explicitly states that the $8,000 monthly rent reduction is entirely conditional, Jonathan clarified, tapping the legal contract on the table. It requires the tenant to maintain strict compliance with all financial covenants. As the primary landlord, your holding company retains the absolute unilateral right to terminate that specific subsidy at any moment without prior warning. I looked at the signature line on the document. I was officially shifting from a passive, protective benefactor into an active, ruthless liquidator. The time for quietly subsidizing his arrogant disrespect was over. I was going to cut the financial cord entirely. Draft the official termination notice right now, I instructed, my tone devoid of any paternal warmth. Revoke the conditional subsidy completely. Enforce the standard market rate of $12,000 a month, effective immediately. I want the notice formally delivered to his corporate inbox before the end of the business day. Jonathan nodded swiftly, making a red mark across the contract. I will also include a formal demand for the immediate payment of the current month's adjusted balance, the lawyer added. If he cannot produce the funds within 5 business days, we can initiate standard commercial eviction proceedings without delay. Jonathan looked up from his paperwork, a flash of professional concern crossing his face. Eugene, you understand that implementing this sudden market rate adjustment will completely bankrupt his law firm by Monday morning. He does not have the liquid capital to absorb a rent increase of this magnitude. The business will crash instantly. He will not see this coming, and he will have absolutely no financial defense mechanism in place to survive the immediate cash flow deficit. That is exactly the point, I replied coldly, reaching across the mahogany table to take the heavy silver pen from Jonathan's hand. I stared down at the official termination order, feeling the immense weight of the moment. I was about to actively destroy the business I had quietly helped build, but a rotten foundation cannot sustain a solid structure. The structural rot needed to be cleared away entirely before it consumed everything else in its path. I pressed the tip of the pen against the thick paper, signing my name with firm, deliberate strokes. Execute the order, Jonathan. Send the email directly to his firm's administrative department. Do not offer any extensions, do not negotiate terms, and do not accept partial payments. I handed the signed document back to my lawyer, feeling a profound, undeniable sense of finality. The invisible safety net was officially gone. Aaron was finally going to experience gravity. I gathered my wet coat and walked out of the conference room, leaving the stacks of financial evidence behind. My phone was still powered off in my pocket, completely blocking the frantic apologies I knew my son was desperately trying to deliver. The silent adjustment was in full motion. Aaron was about to wake up to a reality he was entirely unprepared for, and he would soon realize the true cost of his entitled disrespect. I turned my sedan onto our quiet street just before noon and immediately spotted the silver imported sports car blocking my driveway. Aaron was pacing back and forth across my front porch, completely ignoring the lingering drizzle from the morning storm. He gripped a cardboard cup of expensive artisan coffee, wearing a tailored navy suit that likely cost more than my first mortgage. My son had come unannounced to aggressively repair the damage he allowed last night. The gravel crunched loudly under my work boots as I approached the concrete steps. Aaron stopped pacing immediately, plastering a bright, aggressively forced smile across his face. He reached out to pat my shoulder, a hollow gesture completely devoid of any actual warmth or genuine affection. He was trying to project the effortless confidence of a highly successful attorney, desperately masking the sheer suffocating panic I knew was actively boiling just beneath his polished corporate surface. "Dad, I really wanted to come by and clear the air about last night." Aaron started smoothly, completely bypassing any actual greeting. Megan was just incredibly stressed about the new country club renovations and the contractors. You know exactly how anxious she gets when projects run behind schedule. She never meant to sound disrespectful at the restaurant. It was just a massive misunderstanding blown totally out of proportion. He recited the fabricated excuse without missing a beat. I did not react to the blatant gaslighting. I simply pulled my keys from my pocket, unlocked the heavy wooden front door, and gestured for him to step inside the house. I kept my face perfectly neutral, seamlessly slipping into the familiar role of the passive, infinitely forgiving father. I needed him to believe that his pathetic, transparent lie had worked flawlessly, ensuring he remained completely blind to the financial execution currently moving through my attorney's office. Aaron stepped into the warm living room and visibly exhaled, letting the heavy tension completely drop from his rigid shoulders. He assumed my silence was simply my usual stoic acceptance of his bad behavior. He confidently strode over to the leather sofa, sitting down and crossing his legs with an arrogant, deeply offensive ease. He did not even bother to ask where his mother was, proving his apology was nothing more than a shallow, tactical transaction. "So how are things proceeding down at the law firm?" I asked, intentionally feeding him the exact rope he needed to hang himself. I took a seat in my armchair, projecting a calm, fatherly curiosity. Aaron immediately sat up straighter, enthusiastically taking the bait. He completely abandoned his fake apology, eager to pivot back to his favorite subject. He loved talking about his own fabricated greatness, totally unaware that the building he occupied was actively evicting him. I watched him carefully as he spoke. There was absolutely no remorse in his eyes for letting his wife humiliate Evelyn in public. There was only the greedy, desperate relief of a man who firmly believed his personal ATM was still safely dispensing cash. He was completely disconnected from the reality of his own actions, viewing his parents not as human beings worthy of basic dignity, but strictly as reliable financial assets to be managed and manipulated. "The firm is expanding massively, Dad," Aaron bragged, gesturing wildly with his expensive coffee cup. "We just landed a huge corporate merger account that will easily triple our projected quarterly revenue. My partner and I are practically turning away high net worth clients because our current roster is so incredibly stacked." I sat there remembering the day I bought him his first cheap suit for high school mock trial, foolishly believing he would grow up possessing actual integrity. In fact, Megan and I are actively touring new vacation properties along the coast next week. Aaron continued smoothly weaving his financial fantasies with sociopathic ease. We need a secondary property to entertain the new corporate partners. Success demands a certain visible lifestyle, Dad. You have to spend money to make money in my bracket. I listened to his delusions, fully aware of the damning financial audit sitting on Jonathan's desk. Aaron was actively drowning in $90,000 of high-interest consumer debt, and his boutique law firm was functionally bankrupt without my hidden commercial subsidy. He lied to my face without a single ounce of moral friction. He looked me dead in the eye and fabricated a multi-million-dollar empire desperately trying to project dominance over the very man secretly funding his entire existence. The absolute ease with which he deceived me permanently eradicated any lingering shreds of paternal guilt I felt about cutting him off. His performance confirmed that the brutal financial destruction I initiated at the lawyer's office was not just a harsh lesson, but an absolute undeniable necessity. I was not destroying a good man. I was simply dismantling a dangerous pathological fraud. That sounds incredibly impressive, son, I replied, keeping my tone light and deeply encouraging. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees to appear fully engaged. But with all those massive commercial expansions and the highly stressful country club renovations Megan mentioned earlier, do you require any temporary assistance with your personal cash flow? I know exactly how tight liquid capital can get when you are scaling a corporate business so aggressively. I set the trap flawlessly, offering him the exact illusion of a financial bailout he had driven all the way over here to securely secure from me. Aaron's eyes instantly lit up with raw, undisguised greed. He expertly masked his sheer desperation with a heavy performative sigh. Well, Dad, honestly, we are experiencing a minor, highly temporary cash flow issue due to a delayed corporate settlement payment. A quick $50,000 bridge loan would comfortably smooth out the renovation timeline, but I absolutely hate asking you for it. He fabricated the entire crisis effortlessly, completely blind to the incoming eviction notice. Before I could offer a response, Aaron's smartwatch suddenly illuminated brightly against his wrist. He had placed his arm casually along the back of the leather sofa, angling the digital screen perfectly toward my line of sight. The device vibrated softly, flashing an urgent incoming text message notification directly into my view. The bold black letters glowed aggressively on the small screen, completely betraying the confident, wealthy narrative he had just spent the last 20 minutes constructing. I clearly read Megan's frantic incoming message. Did the old man cut the check yet? The bank just declined my platinum card at the spa, and they are threatening to cancel my membership. Aaron quickly glanced down at his wrist, the color rapidly draining from his cheeks, as he realized I had a clear vantage point. He swiftly lowered his arm, aggressively clearing his throat, and trying to quickly pivot the conversation back to his fake corporate settlement. I simply smiled warmly, looking at my arrogant, completely broke son. Do not worry about the renovations, Aaron. We will get your finances completely sorted out very soon. I promised, knowing the eviction notice would hit his inbox by 5 o'clock. Aaron stood up, visibly relieved, completely convinced he had successfully manipulated his naive father. He walked out the front door, confidently, heading back to a luxury life that was actively expiring in just a few short hours. I barely had time to pour myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee before my secure mobile phone vibrated violently against the polished granite kitchen counter. The caller identification displayed Jonathan's private office line, completely bypassing the usual protocol of waiting for our scheduled afternoon debrief. I picked up the device immediately, knowing my veteran attorney never interrupted his morning court preparations, unless a situation had severely escalated beyond our initial projections. Evelyn was standing quietly near the bright bay window, carefully watering her lush indoor ferns with a small copper pitcher. The morning sunlight gently caught the silver strands in her hair, highlighting the quiet grace she maintained despite the heavy emotional toll of the previous night. I turned my back to the kitchen, seeking absolute privacy in the hallway, not wanting to disturb her fragile peace with whatever new financial disaster our son had carelessly triggered. Eugene, we have a massive critical development regarding your son's commercial liabilities, Jonathan announced the very second the encrypted line connected, skipping any standard professional pleasantries. I initiated a deep dive into the corporate credit profiles associated with his boutique law practice, specifically looking for any hidden debts. I just flagged a massive high-risk commercial bridge loan he secured from a regional banking institution exactly 3 months ago. The principal amount is staggering, but the underlying security agreement is the actual problem. I leaned heavily against the wooden frame of the hallway door, feeling an unfamiliar knot tighten firmly inside my chest. Aaron was already drowning in consumer debt, but a high-risk commercial loan suggested a level of desperation I had not fully calculated. "Give me the exact numbers, Jonathan," I commanded, keeping my voice dangerously low so Evelyn could not hear. "And tell me exactly what that arrogant fool used to secure that kind of capital." "He borrowed $250,000 to cover his firm's mounting operational deficits," Jonathan explained, his tone laced with absolute legal disgust. "The banking institution required a substantial tangible asset to underwrite a corporate loan of that massive magnitude. Your son did not use his luxury vehicles or his leased condo because he does not actually own them. He legally pledged the deed to your primary residence as the sole collateral for the loan." A blinding flash of pure, unadulterated fury coursed through my veins, temporarily paralyzing my ability to speak. "My primary residence is fully paid off and completely solely in my name," I stated, my voice dropping to a terrifying guttural whisper. "The bank would mandate my physical presence and my notarized signature to process that commercial lien." "How did he bypass the fundamental underwriting security protocols without my explicit documented consent?" "He completely forged your physical signature, Eugene," Jonathan replied bluntly, delivering the devastating truth without any cushion. "He exploited his credentials as an active attorney to fraudulently notarize the property transfer documents using his firm's official corporate stamp. He submitted a perfectly falsified application leveraging his professional legal standing to bypass the standard banking verification procedures entirely. If he defaults on this specific loan, the bank possesses the absolute legal right to foreclose on your family home." I closed my eyes tightly, gripping the heavy phone as the sheer magnitude of his betrayal washed over me. Evelyn and I had purchased this modest brick house 40 years ago, scraping together every single dime from my grueling dock shifts. We had intentionally skipped vacations, worn cheap shoes, and worked ourselves to the bone to ensure we owned this specific piece of earth outright. It was our sacred sanctuary, our ultimate symbol of generational stability. Aaron knew exactly what this home meant to his mother and me. He grew up watching us painstakingly maintain the hardwood floors and repair the aging roof with our own 2 hands. Yet he was entirely willing to risk rendering his elderly black parents homeless just to artificially sustain his crumbling fake aristocratic lifestyle. He prioritized his wife's extravagant country club membership over the basic shelter of the people who gave him life. The absolute depravity of his selfish calculation shattered any remaining illusions I held about his moral character. He was completely devoid of any basic human empathy. The sorrow that had plagued me since the disastrous Mother's Day dinner instantly evaporated permanently, replaced by the frigid precision of a corporate executioner. I was no longer dealing with a misguided son who merely needed a stern financial lesson. I was actively dealing with a brazen criminal who posed a direct existential threat to my wife's physical safety and our hard-earned retirement. I took a deep, steadying breath forcefully, compartmentalizing the parental grief. My mind shifted entirely into tactical warfare. Aaron had arrogantly weaponized the law to steal my property, so I would ruthlessly weaponize my wealth to dismantle his entire universe. How quickly can we completely invalidate that fraudulent collateral agreement? I asked Jonathan, pacing the length of the hallway with renewed aggressive energy. I refused to let a predatory banking institution hold a single ounce of leverage over Evelyn's home because of his pathetic forgery. We need an airtight legal maneuver that legally severs the house from his commercial loan without immediately alerting him to the blockade. He needs to walk straight into a solid brick wall the very second he attempts to access those funds. I stopped pacing, staring at the heavy front door with absolute, unwavering, destructive resolve. The most direct route is contacting the authorities immediately, Jonathan advised, his voice adopting a stern, cautionary tone. We can file a formal police report for criminal forgery and real estate fraud right now. The police will arrest him at his office, and the bank will instantly freeze the commercial loan pending the criminal investigation. It is the safest, most conventional method to protect your assets and punish his illegal actions under the full extent of state law. Absolutely not, I countered, instantly rejecting the conventional strategy without a second thought. The criminal justice system moves entirely too slow for the level of destruction I require. Aaron is an experienced attorney. He knows exactly how to manipulate the courts, delay the hearings, and drag the legal proceedings out for years while continuing to live in luxury. He would spin a narrative of a simple misunderstanding to protect his pristine corporate reputation. I want a flawless, immediate financial demolition that leaves him absolutely nowhere to hide. I commanded, my voice projecting undeniable authority. I want him to watch his entire fake empire collapse in real time, stripped of his resources, his fake friends, and his entitled wife. Transfer the title of this house into an irrevocable trust by noon today. Void the collateral silently, and let his banking institution trigger the fatal trap on their own aggressive timeline. The transfer documents will be finalized within the hour, Eugene. Jonathan confirmed, fully recognizing the cold finality in my instructions. The trap is officially set. I ended the call and walked back to the coat rack. It was time to pay my arrogant son a surprise visit at his pristine corporate law firm. I needed to look the thief right in the eye before I pulled the floor completely out from under his feet. I stepped out of the brass elevator and onto the plush carpet of my son's downtown law firm. The massive glass doors displayed his name in bold silver lettering, a glittering testament to a success he never actually earned. The reception area was intentionally designed to intimidate, featuring sleek leather furniture and a sweeping panoramic view of the city skyline. I stood there silently observing the lavish corporate facade my quiet subsidies had built. Megan was sitting perfectly poised behind the expansive granite reception desk, acting as the firm's makeshift office manager to artificially inflate their operational budget. She immediately jumped up the second she recognized my brown winter coat, smoothing down her tailored designer skirt. The stark contrast between her aggressive public hostility at the restaurant and her current sugary demeanor was physically repulsive. She practically sprinted across the lobby, her high heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. "Eugene, it is an absolute pleasure to see you today," Megan announced brightly, reaching out to grasp my arm with fake, trembling enthusiasm. "Aaron is finishing a highly confidential client call, but he will be right out. Can I fetch you a premium espresso or sparkling water while you wait?" "We were actually just talking about your fascinating commercial real estate portfolio this morning. I had absolutely no idea you acquired so many highly lucrative downtown properties during the recession." I did not accept her transparent invitation to sit, or did I accept her offered beverage. I looked down at her manicured hand resting on my sleeve and waited in complete silence until she nervously pulled it away. She was aggressively fishing for financial details, desperately trying to map out the exact dimensions of the gold mine they just discovered. "I am simply here to see my son," I stated firmly, offering no further information. The heavy oak door to the primary executive suite swung open, and Aaron strode into the lobby with a broad, arrogant smile. He walked straight toward me, carrying a thick leather binder tucked securely under his left arm. He completely ignored the crushing financial reality closing in around his forged bank loan, choosing instead to play the role of the devoted protective child. He ushered me directly into his sprawling corner office, swiftly closing the door behind us. "Dad, I am incredibly glad you came down here today." Aaron began smoothly sliding the leather binder across his massive glass desk. "Megan and I had a long emotional conversation last night. We realized we have been completely neglecting our familial duties regarding your long-term security. You have worked far too hard your entire life to worry about managing complex commercial assets in your old age. We want to lift that heavy burden off your shoulders entirely." I stared quietly, at the embossed folder resting on the desk, feeling a chilling wave of disgust wash over my spirit. He was not apologizing for his wife's blatant racism or his own pathetic cowardice at the restaurant. He was actively utilizing that specific conflict as a convenient psychological pivot to launch his ultimate financial trap. He actually believed I was a naive, easily manipulated senior citizen who would willingly surrender my independence for a crumb of fake affection. During his expensive law school years, I had repeatedly stressed the critical importance of ironclad contracts and fiduciary responsibility. I paid top dollar for his education, so he would never be taken advantage of by predatory corporate entities. I watched him graduate with honors, completely unaware that he was absorbing those high-level legal tactics specifically to use them against his own blood. He learned how to legally steal, and now he was aggressively targeting his own parents. Aaron confidently flipped the binder open, revealing a meticulously drafted legal document titled Comprehensive Wealth Management and Irrevocable Transfer Trust. He pushed a gold pen toward my side of the desk. This agreement officially appoints me as the sole executor and primary trustee of your entire real estate holding company, Aaron explained, masking his raw greed with a professional, calming cadence. It legally protects your assets from sudden market volatility and ensures Megan and I can instantly handle your medical care costs without any bureaucratic delays if your cognitive health ever begins to decline unexpectedly in the near future. The absolute audacity of his proposal crystallized his entire criminal strategy in my mind. He was not just trying to cover his immediate consumer debt or secure a bridge loan to save his failing firm. Aaron and Megan were attempting a complete hostile legal takeover of my lifelong work. They intended to trick me into voluntarily signing away my commercial empire, stripping me of every single financial defense mechanism I possessed. Once my signature hit that page, they would have the absolute legal authority to liquidate my assets, sell the family home, and force Evelyn and me into a cheap state-funded facility. I looked directly into my son's eyes, searching for any lingering trace of the boy who used to help me wash the sedan on Sunday mornings. There was absolutely nothing left but a cold, calculating predator demanding my unconditional surrender. I slowly reached out and picked up the gold pen, letting him experience a brief, intoxicating thrill of absolute victory. But instead of signing the fraudulent document, I calmly closed the heavy leather binder. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and slid the entire legal contract directly into the deep inner pocket of my brown winter coat, securing the criminal evidence. Aaron's confident smile instantly faltered, his brow furrowing in deep, visible confusion as I secured the paperwork against my chest. "Dad, you have to execute the signature on the final page so I can properly file it with the county clerk this afternoon," he stammered, standing up from his leather chair in a sudden panic. "You cannot simply take the unexecuted contract with you. That is a highly sensitive, proprietary legal document drafted specifically for this internal firm meeting. I am going to have my own independent counsel review every single clause before I make any permanent decisions regarding my estate," I replied smoothly, standing up and straightening my collar. "A wise businessman never signs a binding corporate contract under pressure, son. You taught me that yourself." I turned my back on his mounting panic and walked purposefully out of his lavish office, leaving him completely paralyzed behind his massive desk. Megan was still eagerly waiting by the reception desk when I emerged into the lobby, her eyes darting eagerly toward my hands to see if I carried a signed agreement. I offered her a polite, entirely hollow smile as I walked briskly past her station. "Have a wonderful afternoon, Megan," I said calmly, pushing open the heavy glass doors to the main corridor. She did not respond, her fake, sugary facade instantly dropping into a stark expression of absolute, unadulterated dread. I stepped directly into the waiting brass elevator and firmly pressed the button for the ground floor lobby. As the heavy metal doors began to slide shut completely, severing my physical connection to Aaron's fraudulent corporate world, I pulled my secure mobile phone from my pocket. I quickly opened my encrypted messaging application and typed a single decisive sentence to Jonathan. "Execute the commercial eviction immediately." The doors locked shut, and the absolute destruction began. The digital clock on my secure laptop flipped to precisely 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon. I sat at my home office desk, staring intently at the live security feed from the downtown commercial parking garage I legally owned. Jonathan had just forwarded me the delivery confirmation receipt. The automated legal server officially deposited the commercial lease termination notice directly into Aaron's corporate inbox. The long-awaited financial detonation was officially hitting its primary target today. Through the high-definition security camera positioned in his office suite lobby, I watched my son aggressively shove his leather chair backward. The heavy piece of expensive furniture slammed violently against the floor-to-ceiling window. Aaron stood up abruptly, his hands gripping his dark hair as he stared in absolute horror at his computer monitor. The email boldly outlined the immediate implementation of the $12,000 market rate rent and demanded $200,000 in waived subsidies. Aaron snatched his desk phone from its receiver, his mouth moving frantically as he rapidly dialed his banking institution. I could easily read the sheer, unadulterated panic suddenly radiating from his erratic body language. He slammed his fist down hard onto the glass desk, completely ignoring Megan as she walked into his office carrying a stack of client folders. She immediately dropped the heavy paperwork, rushing to his side with wide eyes, demanding to know what sudden catastrophic news had just derailed his arrogant composure. I sipped my black coffee, feeling an absolute terrifying calmness settle deep inside my chest. I felt no pity watching my son crumble under the massive weight of his own financial incompetence. He firmly believed he was an untouchable legal titan who could casually disrespect his black parents without facing any tangible blowback. He was currently learning that his entire corporate identity was nothing but a fragile paper castle built entirely on my silent charity. My phone buzzed with an incoming secure text message from Jonathan, clearly updating me on the ongoing collateral damage. Aaron was frantically attempting to draw emergency funds from his secondary business credit lines to cover the sudden $200,000 corporate liability. The automated banking systems were actively denying every single transaction. His accounts were completely maxed out, utterly crippled by the massive consumer debt he aggressively accumulated to maintain Megan's lavish country club lifestyle and their fraudulent public image. "His corporate credit cards just bounced across the board, Eugene," Jonathan stated flatly over our connected audio link. He tried pushing a $10,000 advance to stop the bleeding, but the underwriting algorithms flagged the account for severe delinquency. He possesses zero liquid capital to absorb this specific commercial shockwave. I watched the silent camera feed as Aaron threw his phone across the desk, screaming at his terrified wife while his firm collapsed entirely. I leaned back quietly in my chair, watching the swift, mechanical destruction of his artificial pride. He had intentionally forged my physical signature on a massive commercial bridge loan, fully prepared to sacrifice Evelyn's secure retirement just to keep his failing business afloat. He arrogantly gambled our home to protect his ego, firmly convinced I would never discover his illicit maneuvers. Now the overwhelming crush of legitimate financial accountability was rapidly compressing his chest, leaving him absolutely nowhere to run. During his expensive undergraduate years, Aaron constantly begged me to co-sign premium auto loans and luxury apartment leases. I consistently refused, explicitly teaching him that carrying unsecured debt was a very dangerous trap designed to enslave ambitious black professionals. He falsely accused me of being financially illiterate and horribly unsupportive, aggressively claiming my conservative mindset was permanently holding him back. He deeply resented my quiet fiscal discipline, ultimately choosing to fund his adult life through smoke mirrors and predatory lending. I strategically transitioned the primary camera feed on my monitor from the executive lobby to the underground commercial parking structure. As the landlord of the premium downtown high-rise, my holding company maintained absolute administrative control over the restricted subterranean garage. Aaron firmly believed his reserved parking space was an exclusive corporate perk granted by the prestigious building management. He was completely unaware that I specifically authorized that secure parking bay to ensure his leased luxury vehicles remained entirely safe daily. I utilized my hidden power to grant him peace of mind and he aggressively squandered that massive privilege. My encrypted phone chimed again, displaying a rapid sequence of text messages from the building's chief security officer. A heavily modified tow truck had just breached the perimeter of the executive parking structure, utilizing a specialized legal access code granted by the primary auto financing institution. Aaron had intentionally redirected his monthly vehicle lease payments to temporarily cover his law firm's failing payroll accounts, foolishly assuming the massive auto lenders would easily ignore a 90-day delinquency. The banking algorithms do not care about his fabricated social status or his aggressive arrogance. The rigid mathematical consequences of his severe negligence were finally arriving in person. I watched the stark black and white security footage as the aggressive recovery agents swiftly backed their heavy commercial rig toward Megan's pristine white luxury sport utility vehicle. The men operated with brutal mechanical efficiency, completely ignoring the premium corporate setting as they slid the hydraulic steel forks directly under the front tires of her prized possession. They did not knock on the law firm's glass doors to politely request the keys. They simply attached the heavy safety chains, hoisted the extremely expensive vehicle into the air, and legally repossessed her ultimate symbol of upper-class entitlement right out of her assigned corporate parking spot. Upstairs in the glass executive suite, Megan suddenly checked her smartphone, reacting violently to the automated notification triggered by the vehicle's onboard security system. She bolted out of the corporate office, completely abandoning her hysterical husband as she frantically sprinted toward the private brass elevators. She was absolutely terrified of losing her primary status symbol, racing down to the subterranean level to aggressively confront the recovery agents. She still believed her aggressive entitlement could bully the blue-collar workers into compliance. The security feed captured Megan bursting out of the elevator banks just as the heavy tow truck began pulling her prized vehicle toward the concrete exit ramp. She ran across the parking garage in her expensive designer heels, waving her arms wildly and screaming at the completely indifferent driver. The massive rig did not even slow down, seamlessly exiting the secure facility and permanently removing her artificial aristocratic pride. The illusion was completely shattered. Aaron arrived in the cold parking garage moments later, sprinting out of the stairwell, with his tie completely undone and his tailored suit jacket hastily discarded. Megan immediately spun around, unleashing a vicious, unhinged verbal assault directly into his face. She violently shoved his chest wildly, gesturing toward the empty concrete parking space where her luxury vehicle used to sit. The pristine, highly curated facade of their flawless, wealthy marriage cracked instantly under the crushing pressure of sudden, undeniable poverty. I watched the silent, destructive argument unfold on my monitor, observing my son desperately begging his hostile wife to remain calm while his professional world actively burned to ash. The brutal financial reckoning I orchestrated was executing exactly as planned, successfully stripping away every single layer of their unearned privilege. However, the most critical component of his ultimate punishment had not yet arrived. The forged collateral trap was finally preparing to brutally snap shut. At precisely 9 o'clock on Monday morning, Aaron sat sweating inside the polished glass office of his regional bank manager. He gripped a leather briefcase across his lap, his knuckles turning pale as he desperately tried to project the image of a thriving corporate attorney. He was currently attempting to secure a massive emergency bridge loan to immediately cover his exorbitant commercial rent and stop the impending collapse of his entirely fraudulent boutique law firm. The stark fluorescent lighting of the financial institution offered absolutely no comfort to a man drowning in severe debt. Aaron nervously tapped his expensive fountain pen against his knee, sliding the fraudulent application directly across the pristine mahogany desk. He needed the bank manager to instantly approve the capital injection to prevent a complete payroll default. His entire arrogant existence now depended entirely on a single banker quickly glancing over the forged paperwork and authorizing the funds. Aaron spoke with a sickening blend of fabricated confidence and raw desperation, aggressively assuring the banker that his primary collateral was completely bulletproof. He explicitly referenced my paid-off brick house, casually tossing around the massive equity Evelyn and I had spent 4 decades carefully accumulating. He boldly promised the executive that the residential property easily covered the massive corporate deficit he was currently carrying. He weaponized his own parents' financial stability to artificially inflate his crumbling corporate reputation. Sitting quietly in my home office, I received a secure, real-time update from Jonathan, confirming my son was actively attempting to execute the fraud. I did not feel a single ounce of paternal anxiety. I simply stared at my computer screen, sipping my dark roast coffee, fully anticipating the exact minute the regional bank manager accessed the county deed records. My son was aggressively walking straight into an impenetrable legal wall of my own design. The bank manager, Mr. Harrison, diligently typed Aaron's provided information into his secure terminal. He paused, a deep frown instantly forming across his professional features. He slowly turned the flat monitor toward the edge of the desk, adjusting his glasses with severe concern. He looked Aaron directly in the eye and stated that there was a massive, irreconcilable discrepancy regarding the primary property title. The residential collateral listed on the application was actively flagging a catastrophic system error. Mr. Harrison firmly stated that the house located in the suburbs was no longer legally held by Eugene or Evelyn. He flatly informed my son that the specific deed was officially transferred into an irrevocable commercial holding trust exactly 3 days ago. The banker's voice contained absolutely no sympathy, only the rigid, unforgiving tone of a financial officer discovering a massive liability. The property was completely locked away, permanently, severed from Aaron's fraudulent legal reach. An irrevocable trust is an absolute, indestructible financial fortress. Once an asset crosses that specific legal threshold, no forged signature or predatory lending institution on earth can pierce its armor. I had intentionally weaponized that exact corporate structure to instantly neutralize his criminal strategy. The bank possessed zero leverage over my home, rendering his falsified application completely useless. Aaron had foolishly assumed my assets were vulnerable, completely underestimating the sophisticated financial architecture I had silently constructed over decades. During his expensive undergraduate years, I spent countless hours sitting at our kitchen table, specifically teaching Aaron the foundational principles of complex property law. I painstakingly explained the absolute permanence of an irrevocable trust, ensuring he understood how wealthy families shielded their assets from aggressive litigation. Ironically, I had handed him the exact legal definitions he was now being brutally crushed by. My son knew instantly that an irrevocable trust was an absolute, unyielding dead end. The modern banking system operates without a single shred of human emotion, functioning purely on ruthless mathematical logic and strict liability protocols. Because the submitted collateral was legally void, the existing $250,000 commercial loan Aaron previously secured was now entirely unsecured. The banking software automatically triggered an aggressive default protocol, immediately recognizing his law firm as a catastrophic financial risk. I had intentionally allowed him to walk into the institution to ask for more money, knowing it would legally force the bank to review his current standing and independently discover the massive structural void in his account. Mr. Harrison swiftly tapped a command into his keyboard, his professional demeanor shifting into aggressive damage control. He flatly informed Aaron that not only was the new emergency bridge loan completely denied, but the bank was officially calling in the existing commercial loan immediately. The entire $250,000 principal was now payable in full, effective today. The institution was actively moving to freeze his operating accounts to mitigate their exposure to his fraudulent misrepresentations. My son was financially paralyzed in the span of 30 seconds, utterly incapable of defending himself against the rapid mechanical execution of standard corporate banking policies. Aaron frantically stammered, desperately trying to salvage his collapsing empire by offering his boutique law firm's remaining liquid assets as alternative collateral. He aggressively promised to pledge his corporate accounts, office equipment, and pending client retainers to secure the demanded funds. Mr. Harrison calmly interrupted his pathetic, groveling reading directly from the updated system alerts. The banker coldly informed him that a senior commercial landlord had already placed a primary unyielding lien on the firm's entire remaining capital to cover a massive rent default. His business was already legally gutted. He had absolutely nothing left to bargain with. Aaron went completely numb, his expensive leather briefcase slipping from his trembling fingers and hitting the carpeted floor with a heavy thud. The pristine walls of the bank manager's office seemingly spun around him. He stared blankly at Mr. Harrison, the horrifying reality of his absolute, undeniable bankruptcy violently crashing down onto his shoulders. His arrogant superiority evaporated instantly, leaving behind a terrified, utterly broken man who was finally experiencing the brutal consequences of his own unchecked greed. Sitting frozen in the leather chair, Aaron finally connected the rapid, devastating succession of disasters destroying his life. The complimentary dinner at the luxury restaurant, orchestrated by the general manager. The sudden, catastrophic termination of his downtown office rent subsidy. The perfectly timed property transfer shielding the family home. The sequence was too flawless, too surgically precise to be an unfortunate coincidence. The invisible hand guiding his total financial ruin belonged to the man he deeply disrespected. Aaron stumbled blindly out of the regional bank, leaving his useless forged applications abandoned on the manager's desk. He pushed through the heavy glass doors and stumbled onto the busy morning sidewalk, completely ignoring the bustling city traffic. He frantically pulled his smartphone from his suit pocket, staring with wide, terrified eyes at my contact name glowing on the digital screen. He finally realized his naive retired father was actually the ruthless, meticulous architect of his total destruction. I sat quietly in my home office, watching my encrypted phone screen light up with Aaron's incoming call. I did not answer the device, simply letting the digital rings echo through the quiet hallway. The pristine financial demolition was officially complete, leaving my son stripped of his fraudulent wealth and his arrogant pride. The impending desperate home invasion was now the only remaining move left on his board, and I was entirely prepared for his arrival. The heavy brass knocker on my front door slammed repeatedly, echoing through the quiet foyer of my home. It was barely noon yet. The frantic, aggressive pounding suggested a life-or-death emergency. I did not rush from my home office. I took my time, deliberately buttoning my cardigan and adjusting my reading glasses. The security monitor clearly displayed Aaron and Megan standing on my porch, their faces flushed with absolute panic and undeniable rage. I slowly unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Aaron immediately pushed his way inside, completely abandoning any pretense of familial respect. Megan trailed closely behind him, her designer trench coat soaked from the morning rain, her eyes wild with a frantic, desperate energy. They stood in my entryway, tracking mud onto the hardwood floors Evelyn had painstakingly polished just yesterday, completely oblivious to the sacred sanctity of our home. "You need to fix this right now, Dad," Aaron demanded, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of his collapsing reality. "I just left the bank and they froze all my operating accounts. The commercial loan was called in and the firm is officially bankrupt. You have to transfer the deed back into my name or guarantee the bridge loan immediately." He spoke with the aggressive, entitled authority of a man who still believed his father was a subservient financial tool. I stood perfectly still, letting his frantic demands wash over me without a single flinch. "I do not have to fix anything, Aaron," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and entirely devoid of any paternal warmth. "You broke your own toys, son. You built a fragile, fraudulent empire on a foundation of lies and predatory debt. I am simply refusing to continue subsidizing your arrogant delusions." I turned my back on them and walked slowly into the formal dining room, forcing them to follow me on my territory. I stopped at the long mahogany dining table, resting my hand on a pristine manila folder I had prepared earlier that morning. Aaron scrambled to the opposite side of the table, his chest heaving as he desperately tried to regain control of the narrative. He opened his mouth to launch into another aggressive legal argument, but I silenced him by sliding a single high-resolution photocopy directly across the polished wood. The forged commercial loan application stopped perfectly in front of him. You used this exact document to secure a $250,000 bridge loan from your regional bank, I stated flatly, watching his eyes lock onto his own fraudulent handwriting. You intentionally utilized your official corporate stamp to falsely notarize my signature, illegally pledging this very house as the primary collateral. You were entirely willing to risk rendering your own parents homeless just to maintain your wife's country club membership and your leased luxury vehicles. Aaron's face drained of all color, instantly transforming from aggressive indignation to sheer, unadulterated terror. He stared at the forged signature, his arrogant posture crumbling as he realized the absolute magnitude of his criminal exposure. He slowly looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He finally understood that I did not just discover his financial insolvency. I possessed undeniable documented proof of his severe federal-level criminal actions. Megan gasped loudly, grabbing the edge of the dining table to steady herself. "Aaron, what did you do?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and accusatory. "You told me the bank loan was secured by the firm's projected revenue. You said the capital was completely guaranteed." She immediately turned on him instantly, sacrificing her loyalty to save her own fragile social standing. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy marriage shattered violently right in my dining room. I ignored her hysterical outburst, keeping my eyes locked entirely on my son. My attorney, Jonathan, officially submitted a comprehensive fraud alert to the State Bar Association exactly 1 hour ago, I informed him, my voice devoid of any sympathy. We included a certified copy of this forged loan application and a detailed timeline of your fraudulent notarizations. The State Ethics Committee is actively reviewing your file. Your license to practice law will be suspended indefinitely, pending a full criminal investigation. Aaron gripped the edge of the table, his knees visibly buckling under the catastrophic weight of his imminent disbarment. His entire identity was fundamentally tied to his status as a prestigious corporate attorney. He had weaponized his legal credentials to steal from his own family, and now those exact credentials were being permanently stripped away. The absolute permanence of his professional ruin finally crashed down upon him, leaving him completely paralyzed in the center of my dining room. "You cannot do this to me, Dad," Aaron whispered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate plea. "I am your son. I am your only child. If the State Bar revokes my license, my entire career is permanently over. I will lose absolutely everything." I stared at him coldly, feeling no remorse for the swift mechanical execution of his professional demise. He had willingly gambled his entire future on a predatory, illegal scheme, completely expecting me to absorb the fatal consequences of his failure. "You made your choice the second you forged my name, Aaron," I replied, leaning forward slightly to emphasize the gravity of my ultimatum. "However, I am willing to offer you a single, incredibly narrow path to mitigate your immediate criminal exposure. You have exactly 60 seconds to make the most important decision of your miserable life. If you decline, Jonathan will instantly forward this entire dossier to the federal prosecutor's office for criminal indictment." I slid a second, significantly thicker legal document across the table. "This is a comprehensive asset forfeiture agreement," I explained, tapping the signature line with my silver pen. "You will legally sign over every single remaining asset associated with your boutique law firm directly to my holding company. This includes all pending client retainers, your office equipment, and the intellectual property rights to your corporate entity. In exchange, I will quietly withdraw the criminal forgery complaint regarding the bank loan." Aaron stared at the forfeiture agreement, his breathing shallow and rapid. He realized the absolute brutality of my strategic countermove. I was intentionally stripping him of every single financial resource he possessed, effectively ensuring he could never rebuild his fraudulent corporate empire. He would be left with absolutely nothing but the crushing consumer debt he aggressively accumulated. I was completely neutralizing his ability to ever threaten my financial security again, locking him out of the legal profession forever. He slowly reached out with a trembling hand, picking up the heavy silver pen. He did not look at Megan, who was actively sobbing in the corner of the room, completely devastated by her sudden, undeniable poverty. He did not look at me entirely broken by the sheer magnitude of his absolute failure. He pressed the pen against the thick paper, signing his name with shaking, defeated strokes. The total financial demolition was officially complete, leaving my son stripped of his fraudulent wealth and his arrogant pride. The heavy silver pen slipped from Aaron's trembling fingers and clattered sharply against the polished mahogany dining table. Megan stared at the signed forfeiture agreement with wide, frantic eyes, her chest heaving violently under her damp designer trench coat. She finally comprehended the absolute devastating permanence of the signature her husband had just executed. The luxury lifestyle she had so aggressively demanded was officially and legally liquidated right in front of her perfectly manicured hands. The heavy silence in the formal dining room was absolutely suffocating, broken only by the steady drum of the freezing rain against the large bay windows. Evelyn stood perfectly still near the archway, her face a mask of quiet, dignified stoicism as she watched the chaotic scene unfold. I remained seated directly across the table, my posture rigid and unforgiving. I was actively observing the immediate, terrifying psychological collapse of a woman who had just lost her primary financial host. "Are you completely insane, Aaron?" Megan suddenly shrieked, breaking the thick tension with a jagged, hysterical pitch. "You just signed away the entire firm. You surrendered every single corporate account, the pending client retainers, and your entire professional future to your father. How are we supposed to pay the mortgage on the condo? How are we going to survive the week without any liquid capital?" She lunged forward aggressively, snatching the heavy legal document as if she could physically erase his final binding black ink. I watched my son shrink back into his chair, entirely incapable of defending his catastrophic legal surrender. He raised his hands in a weak, pathetic gesture of surrender, desperately trying to pacify his unhinged wife. I did not intervene to protect him from her vicious verbal assault. I sat back and observed the brutal mathematical reality of their fraudulent marriage violently asserting itself. The fake foundation they built together was aggressively ripping apart now completely. "Megan, please calm down and listen to me," Aaron begged, his voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic whimper. "If I did not execute that transfer agreement immediately, Dad was going to submit the forged loan application directly to the federal prosecutor. I would have been indicted for felony fraud by Monday morning. I had absolutely no other choice." He reached out to grasp her wrist, but she violently slapped his trembling hand away with pure, raw, and unadulterated physical disgust. "You lied to me about everything!" Megan screamed, her face twisting into a furious, ugly sneer. "I only married you because of your massive earning potential and your prestigious corporate trajectory. I certainly did not sign up to be legally anchored to a bankrupt, disbarred criminal who has to beg his retired parents for basic mercy." The brutal transactional truth echoed loudly through the room, with a sharp, cutting clarity and total, absolute finality today. I stared at her, deeply repulsed, but completely unsurprised by her stunningly cold confession. Megan was a parasitic entity surgically attached to my son purely to siphon his perceived wealth and artificially elevate her own social standing. She possessed absolutely no genuine loyalty, viewing her marital vows as a strictly conditional commercial contract. The very second the financial subsidies evaporated, her fabricated affection vanished entirely instantly, replaced by a vicious, self-serving instinct for rapid personal economic survival maneuvers today. During their brief, extravagant courtship, Aaron constantly showered her with expensive gifts and lavish vacations, desperately purchasing her approval, using my hidden commercial subsidies. He mistakenly believed he was securing a high-value partner who genuinely loved his character, completely blind to her aggressive gold-digging nature. I had unknowingly funded his romantic illusion, allowing him to buy a premium bride. Now that the bank accounts were drained, she was ruthlessly discarding him like a broken, useless little household appliance. Megan suddenly pivoted on her heels, turning her venomous glare directly toward me and Evelyn. For years, she had subjected my wife to countless racist microaggressions, disguising her deep-seated disdain under layers of passive-aggressive Southern hospitality. She constantly made backhanded remarks about our modest brick home, our simple clothing, and the ethnic dishes Evelyn proudly prepared for holidays. She firmly believed her whiteness and her affluent suburban upbringing granted her an inherent, undeniable superiority over us. She actively resented the fact that a working-class black family possessed the immense capital required to actually fund her elite lifestyle. "This is entirely your fault, you vindictive, miserable old man," Megan shrieked, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my chest. "You intentionally set him up to fail, because you are deeply jealous of our youth and our social standing. I have always absolutely despised coming to this pathetic, outdated house and pretending to respect you people. You tricked us into thinking you were just ignorant fixed-income retirees while you secretly hoarded millions like a greedy tyrant. You deliberately destroyed my perfect marriage just to prove a petty, arrogant point, and I will absolutely never forgive you for this massive public humiliation here today." I did not raise my voice, refusing to grant her the emotional reaction she so desperately craved. I simply leaned forward, resting my forearms against the polished mahogany. "You are completely irrelevant to me, Megan," I stated with a terrifying, icy detachment. "Your marriage was destroyed the exact moment you loudly refused to pay for my wife's dinner. You simply exposed the structural rot that was already consuming your relationship. You are currently trespassing in the home of the man who legally owns your husband's entire existence. I strongly suggest you exit my property before I have you arrested for criminal trespassing right away now." Aaron stared at his wife with hollow, utterly devastated eyes, finally registering the absolute contempt she harbored for his family. He slowly turned his head toward me, his shoulders slumped in total, undeniable defeat. He was entirely stripped of his law firm, his luxury vehicles, his professional reputation, and his transactional marriage. The crushing weight of his monumental failure pinned him to the chair. He looked up at Evelyn and me, silently begging for a miraculous, unconditional rescue attempt today. The physical toll of the morning's brutal financial execution was aggressively manifesting across his pale, sweating face. His breathing was shallow and ragged, his tailored suit completely rumpled and stained with rainwater. He looked like a terrified, lost child, abandoned in a hostile environment, desperately searching for a familiar safety net. He was completely alone, standing in the ruins of his arrogant ambition, fully realizing the catastrophic damage he had inflicted upon his own life. "Dad, Mom, please tell me what I am supposed to do now," Aaron pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic, shattered sob. "I have absolutely nothing left to my name. Megan is leaving me, the firm is gone, and the bank is going to freeze my personal checking accounts by tomorrow morning. You cannot just abandon me like this today." He reached across the table, his trembling fingers desperately grasping for the edge of the signed forfeiture agreement legal contract. Evelyn maintained her rigid silence, refusing to offer him a single glance of maternal comfort. I calmly slid the legal document out of his reach, securing it firmly inside my manila folder. "You are going to leave my house right now, Aaron," I commanded, my voice echoing with brutal, unyielding finality. He stared at our cold faces, completely broken inside. He slowly stood up, turned his back on his shattered life, and walked right out. Megan did not waste a single second mourning the catastrophic end of her fraudulent marriage. By 8 o'clock the following morning, her aggressively priced divorce attorney officially filed an emergency petition for the dissolution of marriage in the county court. The legal filing was a desperate tactical strike designed to immediately seize and freeze any remaining liquid capital Aaron possessed before his creditors could legally lay claim to the funds. She was ruthlessly attempting to secure her own financial parachute by entirely draining his personal checking accounts. She specifically petitioned the judge for an ex parte order to lock Aaron entirely out of their shared financial ecosystem, aggressively claiming he was secretly attempting to hide marital assets. The filing included a massive demand for immediate, exorbitant spousal support, intentionally calculated to maintain her luxurious country club lifestyle, even while her husband faced imminent criminal indictment. She was effectively trying to bleed a stone, completely ignorant of the fact that the stone was already legally pulverized. Aaron was completely blindsided by the vicious speed of her legal assault. He received the emergency divorce papers via a private process server while sitting alone in his dark, unfurnished, rented apartment, staring blankly at the beige carpet. He frantically tried to log into their primary joint banking portal to secure his own remaining cash, fully intending to hire a desperate defense attorney to fight the incoming federal forgery charges. He desperately needed liquidity to simply survive the week. The digital banking application aggressively rejected his credentials, flashing a bold red error message across the screen, indicating a severe mandatory account freeze. He falsely assumed Megan's aggressive divorce attorney had successfully executed the ex parte order, cutting him off entirely from his own money. He was completely wrong. The financial blockade was not initiated by a family court judge handling a messy divorce. It was triggered by a much higher, far more destructive legal authority. Jonathan had completely anticipated Megan's aggressive, predictable divorce strategy. The moment Aaron's commercial fraud alert hit the State Bar Association, my attorney filed a massive, comprehensive injunction with the Federal Financial Crimes Division. Jonathan legally froze every single joint and individual account associated with Aaron and Megan's names, citing the active ongoing investigation into the forged $250,000 bridge loan. The federal freeze superseded any local family court jurisdiction, instantly locking all funds tightly into an impenetrable bureaucratic vault. Megan's slick divorce attorney was completely paralyzed, entirely incapable of accessing the seized capital. The lawyer immediately dropped her as a client when he realized she possessed absolutely zero clean, untainted funds to cover his exorbitant retainer fees. The joint accounts were flagged as potential repositories for illicit, fraudulently obtained commercial loans, meaning every single dollar they possessed was currently locked down as material evidence in a federal criminal investigation. They were both functionally, legally, and permanently destitute. Megan remained completely oblivious to the federal freeze. She firmly believed her aggressive divorce filing had successfully secured her financial dominance over Aaron. She confidently strode into the grand lobby of the city's most exclusive luxury hotel, dragging 2 massive designer suitcases behind her. She aggressively slapped her shiny platinum credit card down on the marble reception desk, loudly demanding the premium penthouse suite for an indefinite extended stay, intending to bill the exorbitant cost directly to their joint accounts. The impeccably dressed concierge swiped the platinum card through the terminal, maintaining a polite, highly professional smile. The machine emitted a sharp, aggressive beep, flashing an immediate decline notification. Megan scoffed loudly, snatched the card back, and aggressively ordered the clerk to try processing it a second time, blaming their inferior technology for the embarrassing delay. She loudly proclaimed her elite status, demanding the general manager intervene immediately to resolve the pathetic inconvenience. The concierge patiently swiped a secondary gold card, then a third, and finally a fourth. Every single transaction was aggressively, instantaneously declined by the primary banking institutions. The federal freeze had systematically voided her entire financial ecosystem. The growing line of wealthy hotel guests behind her began to murmur quietly, watching the arrogant woman absolutely humiliate herself as she desperately dug through her designer purse for a single functioning piece of plastic. She had absolutely nothing left to offer. The general manager quietly approached the marble desk, politely informing Megan that her accounts were flagging severe mandated security holds and respectfully asking her to vacate the luxury lobby. The absolute soul-crushing reality of her complete financial annihilation finally broke through her arrogant facade. She was entirely stripped of her artificial wealth, publicly humiliated in front of the exact elite social circle she desperately fought to impress. She aggressively snatched her useless cards and dragged her heavy suitcases out into the freezing rain. With absolutely no access to liquid capital zero credit lines and an active eviction notice finalizing on their luxury condo, Megan was completely out of options. She had alienated all her affluent friends with her aggressive, entitled behavior, leaving her entirely isolated in the city. Her desperate pride was finally violently shattered. She had no choice but to swallow her arrogance, call a cheap rideshare service, and direct the driver toward the affluent suburbs where her parents resided. Her wealthy, overbearing parents lived in a massive, sprawling estate, but they were deeply ashamed of her sudden, highly public marital collapse. They completely refused to allow her to occupy the pristine guest house, actively treating her like a disgraceful failure who severely damaged their pristine social standing. They aggressively forced her to drag her heavy designer luggage down the narrow, uncarpeted stairs directly into their damp, unfinished basement, intentionally hiding her away from their elite friends. Megan sat alone on a cheap, lumpy futon in the cold basement, staring blankly at the exposed concrete walls. The crushing, suffocating reality of her profound humiliation finally settled heavily onto her chest. She had spent years ruthlessly mocking my modest brick home, aggressively viewing Evelyn and me as pathetic working-class burdens. Now she was entirely stripped of her status, banished to a damp cellar by her own family, while I sat comfortably in my paid-off home, the silent architect of her total destruction. Aaron, meanwhile, sat completely paralyzed in his empty, dark apartment, staring at his useless, deactivated smartphone. He was completely severed from his wife, his law firm, his luxury vehicles, and his entire social identity. The federal freeze had violently stripped away the final remaining shreds of his artificial independence. He was actively drowning in the total, undeniable consequences of his unchecked arrogance, completely alone in a silence far more punishing than any angry words I could have ever spoken. The doorbell rang precisely at 10 o'clock the following morning. I did not need to check the security monitor to know who was standing on my front porch. Through the sheer curtains of the living room window, I could clearly see a massive, pristine, black luxury SUV parked aggressively across my driveway. Megan's parents, Richard and Eleanor Vance, had arrived from their affluent suburban estate to aggressively manage the disastrous fallout of their daughter's shattered marriage. They had come to intimidate me firmly, believing their generational wealth could effortlessly purchase a rapid, discreet resolution to Aaron's impending criminal indictment. I opened the heavy wooden door and stood squarely in the frame, observing the sheer arrogance radiating from the couple. Richard wore an expensive tailored suit, his jaw firmly set in a hard, uncompromising line that demanded immediate deference. Eleanor stood rigidly beside him, clutching a designer handbag, her eyes aggressively scanning my modest brick home with a potent mixture of deep disdain and utter disbelief. They had always treated Evelyn and me like pathetic working-class novelties during the few excruciating holidays we were forced to share. Now they were standing on my property, attempting to utilize their financial privilege to violently bulldoze their way through the massive mess their entitled daughter had helped create. "Eugene, we need to handle this unfortunate situation immediately," Richard announced, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation to enter. He strode directly into my formal dining room, completely ignoring the basic social protocols of entering another man's home. Eleanor followed closely behind him, her nose slightly wrinkled, as if the very air inside my house was somehow deeply offensive to her delicate sensibilities. They operated with the aggressive, unchecked confidence of people who had never encountered a single boundary they could not instantly purchase or destroy. I closed the front door quietly and followed them into the dining room, taking my customary seat at the head of the polished mahogany table. Richard did not sit down. He stood aggressively over the table, quickly reaching into the breast pocket of his expensive suit jacket. He pulled out a crisp, pre-written corporate check and slammed it down onto the polished wood, sliding it aggressively toward my side of the table. "That is $50,000, Eugene," Richard stated, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "That covers the entire balance of Aaron's forged bank loan, plus a very generous premium for your unnecessary inconvenience. You will immediately withdraw your fraudulent complaint from the State Bar Association, and you will instruct your attorney to drop all federal forgery charges against Aaron. My daughter was a co-signer on that disastrous loan, and I absolutely refuse to allow her pristine reputation to be dragged through a messy public criminal investigation simply because your son is an incompetent, pathetic failure." I did not flinch, nor did I reach for the piece of paper resting on the table. I remained perfectly still, leaning back slightly in my chair, projecting an impenetrable, icy calmness that clearly unsettled the arrogant man standing across from me. "You genuinely believe $50,000 is sufficient capital to command my absolute obedience, Richard?" I replied, my voice dangerously low and completely devoid of any emotion. "You walked into my home firmly convinced you could casually purchase my silence and orchestrate a flawless cover-up to protect your daughter's fragile social standing. You assume your wealth grants you ultimate jurisdiction over my family's affairs. We are offering you a highly lucrative exit strategy, Eugene." Eleanor chimed in, her voice shrill and aggressively impatient. "You should be incredibly grateful we are willing to utilize our personal capital to clean up the catastrophic mess your son created. Megan is currently living in our basement because Aaron completely destroyed their financial stability. We simply need this entire pathetic situation instantly erased from the public record so our daughter can cleanly divorce him and successfully rebuild her life without the lingering stench of a federal criminal investigation attached to her name." I slowly reached into the leather briefcase resting beside my chair and extracted a thick, heavily bound financial dossier. I placed it deliberately on the mahogany table directly next to Richard's pathetic $50,000 check. "You are not offering an exit strategy, Eleanor," I stated, tapping the cover of the dossier with my silver pen. "You are attempting a hostile negotiation while remaining completely blind to the actual leverage dynamics in this room. You assume you hold the overwhelming financial advantage because you reside in a gated community and drive imported vehicles. You have grossly underestimated the silent architecture of my commercial holding empire." I opened the dossier and smoothly slid a single, highly detailed legal document across the table. It stopped precisely in front of Richard, displaying a comprehensive summary of his primary commercial contracting business. "2 weeks ago, your contracting firm required a massive emergency capital injection to secure the bidding rights for the new municipal stadium project," I explained, watching his eyes lock onto his own corporate financials. "You secured a $3 million mezzanine loan from an aggressive private equity firm located in Chicago. You specifically leveraged your entire commercial equipment fleet and the deed to your suburban estate to guarantee those highly predatory terms." Richard's face drained of all color, his arrogant posture instantly crumbling as he recognized the highly confidential financial data printed on the page. "How did you possibly acquire access to my private commercial underwriting documents?" he stammered, his voice dropping into a tense, terrified whisper. The absolute certainty he possessed just 5 minutes ago completely evaporated violently, replaced by the crushing realization that his most sensitive corporate secrets were currently resting on my dining room table. My holding company specializes in quietly acquiring high-yield distressed debt from private equity firms, Richard," I replied, leaning forward to emphasize the absolute brutality of my strategic countermove. "We officially purchased your $3 million commercial loan portfolio exactly 48 hours ago. I am now the primary unilateral creditor for your entire contracting business. I legally control the primary liens on your heavy equipment fleet, and I hold the active mortgage on your pristine suburban estate. You do not own a single asset that is not entirely subjugated to my direct financial authority today." Eleanor gasped loudly, instinctively grabbing her husband's arm as the devastating reality of their absolute financial vulnerability crashed down upon her. "This has to be a complete bluff, Richard!" she shrieked, her eyes darting frantically between the dossier and my impassive face. "He is just a retired dock worker. He cannot possibly possess the liquid capital required to execute a hostile corporate debt acquisition of that massive magnitude. He is lying to intimidate us." I ignored her hysterical outburst and kept my gaze locked entirely on Richard. "If you do not immediately vacate my property, I will instruct my attorney to aggressively audit your corporate compliance covenants," I stated, my voice echoing with brutal, unyielding finality. "I will systematically scrutinize every single operational metric of your contracting firm. The very second you miss a single performance benchmark, I will aggressively call in the entire $3 million principal and immediately initiate foreclosure proceedings on your suburban estate." I will legally strip you of your wealth, your business, and your home with the exact same ruthless precision I utilized to destroy my own son." Richard stared at the financial dossier, his breathing shallow and rapid. He realized the absolute undeniable terror of his current position. He had aggressively stomped into my home, intending to casually buy my submission, only to discover I already owned his entire existence. He was completely outmatched, totally outmaneuvered, and actively standing in the crosshairs of a massive, quiet financial empire he could not possibly fight or defeat. He did not attempt to argue or negotiate further. He slowly reached out with a trembling hand, grabbing Eleanor by the arm and aggressively pulling her toward the front door. They fled my home in absolute silence, completely abandoning their arrogant demands and their pathetic attempt to manipulate the federal investigation. They were utterly terrified, entirely broken by the sheer magnitude of their own sudden, undeniable subjugation. I sat alone at the mahogany dining table, listening to the heavy thud of my front door closing and the rapid acceleration of their luxury SUV speeding out of my driveway. I slowly picked up the crisp $50,000 corporate check Richard had aggressively slammed onto the wood. I did not look at the signature or the printed numbers. I calmly ripped the check exactly in half, then in quarters, and tossed the useless pieces of paper directly into the small wastebasket beside my desk. The final external threat was officially neutralized. The cold wind whipped through the downtown financial district as I parked my sedan across the street from the towering glass high-rise. I sat quietly behind the steering wheel, watching the heavy revolving doors of the commercial building spin. Today was Tuesday, precisely 72 hours since the State Ethics Committee received Jonathan's comprehensive fraud dossier. The swift mechanical gears of bureaucratic justice had officially locked into place. Aaron's legal career was completely over. I rolled the window down slightly, letting the frigid city air bite at my cheeks. Across the busy avenue, two uniformed security officers stood firmly outside the main entrance of his former boutique law firm. Yellow warning tape stretched aggressively across the heavy brass handles, officially sealing the corporate suite from the public. The State Bar Association did not hesitate to issue an emergency suspension of his license. The physical blockade was undeniable. My encrypted mobile phone vibrated against the passenger seat. Jonathan was calling to confirm the execution of the final legal mandate. The administrative board officially froze his credentials at 9 o'clock this morning. Eugene, my attorney reported with crisp professional efficiency. They seized his digital case files and completely locked his access to the state legal portals. He cannot legally practice law, consult on corporate matters, or access any client trust accounts. He is entirely disbarred pending the active federal criminal investigation. I did not smile at the confirmation of his total professional ruin. I simply stared at the yellow warning tape flapping aggressively in the cold wind. "Thank you, Jonathan," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of any victorious triumph. "Ensure the building management completes the physical extraction process today. I want zero traces of his fraudulent corporate identity remaining on my property." I ended the call, gripping the leather steering wheel. A commercial maintenance van pulled aggressively into the loading zone directly in front of the high-rise. 3 men in heavy gray jumpsuits stepped out carrying industrial scrapers, chemical solvents, and large black utility bags. They completely bypassed the lobby security desk, utilizing the master keys my holding company specifically provided to them that morning. They were the cleanup crew dispatched to surgically remove the final lingering remnants of my son's arrogant ambition from the glass doors. I watched through the tinted windshield as the maintenance foreman pointed directly toward the massive silver lettering embossed across the pristine glass entryway. He issued a sharp, muffled command to his crew. The workers immediately raised their heavy metal scrapers, pressing the sharp steel edges firmly against the elegant typography. They did not care about the prestige or the thousands of dollars Aaron originally spent on that custom corporate branding. They simply had a job to finish. The harsh, scraping sound of metal against glass echoed faintly across the busy street, a violent auditory symbol of his absolute destruction. I sat in the quiet cabin of my sedan, watching the letter A peel away and fall carelessly into the waiting utility bag. He had spent years aggressively building that fake reputation, stepping on anyone who dared to get in his way. Now 3 hourly workers were casually dismantling his entire legacy in 15 minutes. When Aaron first passed the state bar examination, Evelyn and I hosted a massive celebration in our modest backyard. We invited the entire neighborhood, proudly serving barbecue, while Aaron paraded around in his pristine new suit. I distinctly remember taking him aside, handing him a gold pocket watch, and telling him that a man's name is his most valuable currency. I urged him to protect his professional integrity at all costs. He clearly threw that advice away. He aggressively prioritized Megan's superficial country club approval over the sacred weight of his own family name. He utilized his brilliant legal education not to uplift his community or defend the vulnerable, but to forge fraudulent commercial bridge loans and exploit his own black parents. He firmly believed his elite corporate status granted him an impenetrable shield against basic human accountability. He assumed the rules of basic decency simply did not apply to his tax bracket. He constructed a massive, arrogant monument to his own greed, entirely forgetting that I owned the very ground his monument stood upon. The maintenance crew violently scraped the final silver letter from the heavy glass door, leaving behind only a faint, sticky residue of industrial adhesive. The foreman sprayed a harsh chemical solvent across the glass, wiping the surface completely clean with a heavy rag. In less than 20 minutes, Aaron's boutique law firm was entirely erased from the physical world. The space was now just an empty, dark commercial unit waiting for a reliable tenant. I watched the men pack their tools and walk away, feeling a profound, heavy weight settle deeply into my chest. The financial demolition was executed flawlessly, but the emotional toll was immense. I did not orchestrate this destruction out of spite or petty vengeance. I executed this total collapse because it was the only remaining method to shatter his dangerous delusions. I had to permanently revoke his access to the corporate legal system before he successfully defrauded another innocent victim or utterly destroyed Evelyn's peaceful retirement. I had to physically board up his firm and scrape his name off the door to force him into a brutal confrontation with reality. I shifted my sedan into drive, turning my eyes away from the dark, empty office suite. My work in the financial district was officially complete. Aaron was currently sitting somewhere in his dark, unfurnished apartment, entirely stripped of his wealth, his wife, and his professional license. He was actively experiencing the terrifying, suffocating silence of absolute isolation. The prestigious colleagues he aggressively sought to impress were actively distancing themselves from his toxic criminal fallout. He had absolutely nobody left to manipulate and no more stolen capital to leverage. He was finally alone with the crushing, undeniable consequences of his own hubris. The painful reality of my required role in his downfall burned fiercely in my throat. Society often demands that a father unconditionally protect his child from the harsh cruelty of the world. But when the child actively becomes the cruelty, a father must pivot his protection toward the innocent victims standing in the crossfire. I had to let him fall violently from the massive pedestal he built, ensuring he hit the absolute rock bottom. I drove slowly back toward the suburbs, navigating the busy midday traffic with a heavy but resolute heart. I finally accepted that true, unconditional love sometimes requires stepping aside and actively allowing the hardest consequences to manifest completely. Shielding him from his own failure was no longer an act of parental love. It was an act of dangerous complicity. He needed to experience the freezing cold of absolute ruin to ever possess a chance at true redemption. I pulled into my quiet driveway, shutting off the engine and resting my forehead against the leather steering wheel. The structural rot was completely eradicated, but the brutal aftermath of the demolition remained. Aaron had absolutely nowhere left to hide, nowhere left to run, and no more predatory safety nets to catch his rapid descent. The ultimate final confrontation was completely inevitable, and I knew exactly where his desperate pride would drag him next. I sat in the dim light of my living room when the heavy brass knocker sounded against the front door. It was well past 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. The The driving rain from earlier in the week had returned with a bitter vengeance. I did not need to check the security camera to know who was standing on my porch in the freezing downpour. The final, inevitable confrontation had finally arrived at my doorstep. I slowly unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Aaron stood shivering under the porch light, entirely soaked from the freezing rain. He carried a single cheap duffel bag slung over his drooping shoulder. He lacked his tailored suits, his luxury watch, and his arrogant corporate posture. He looked exactly like a terrified, utterly defeated child who had just been aggressively expelled from a world he never truly belonged in from the very beginning of his career. Aaron stepped into the foyer without waiting for an invitation, dropping his wet bag onto the hardwood floor. He walked directly into the kitchen and collapsed into a chair at the small wooden table. "Megan officially served me the final divorce papers today, Dad," Aaron whispered, burying his face directly into his trembling hands. "The bank completely drained my personal checking accounts, and the landlord locked me out of the rented apartment this very afternoon. I have absolutely nowhere else to go right now tonight." I followed him into the kitchen, standing perfectly still near the archway. Evelyn emerged from the hallway, wrapping her thick knit shawl tightly around her shoulders. She looked down at the broken man sobbing at her kitchen table. I remained completely silent, intentionally allowing the suffocating weight of his absolute failure to fill the room. He desperately wanted us to rush forward and eagerly wipe away his tears, but neither of us moved an inch. "Please, Mom," Aaron pleaded, looking up at Evelyn with wide, bloodshot eyes. "I just need to stay in my old childhood bedroom for a few weeks, until I can secure a public defender job and figure out my next move. I promise I will not be a burden to you." He aggressively leveraged his vulnerability, actively attempting to manipulate his mother's deeply ingrained protective instincts. He firmly believed her maternal guilt would easily override the massive disrespect he ultimately caused. Evelyn did not rush to comfort him. She stepped forward, resting her hands firmly on the back of an empty wooden chair. "A mother's love is absolutely unconditional, Aaron," Evelyn stated, her voice remarkably steady and completely devoid of trembling sorrow. "I will always love you as my son. However, access to the safety and warmth of this specific house is a distinct privilege. It is a privilege you aggressively burned to the very ground." I watched my wife deliver the crushing blow with an awe-inspiring level of quiet grace. For 40 years, she had constantly sacrificed her own comfort to ensure he felt entirely safe and endlessly cherished. He took that boundless devotion, weaponized it, and allowed an entitled woman to publicly humiliate her. Evelyn was finally setting an impenetrable, permanent boundary. She was actively refusing to let his toxic, destructive chaos cross the sacred threshold of her peaceful sanctuary ever again today. Aaron stared at her, utterly shocked by her rigid refusal. During his arrogant teenage years, he frequently threw terrible tantrums whenever he was denied the newest expensive gadgets. Evelyn would eventually cave to his demands, secretly pulling funds from our tight grocery budget just to witness his fleeting smile. He foolishly expected that exact same dynamic to play out tonight. He completely failed to realize that his massive, unforgivable adult transgressions had permanently extinguished her endless reservoir of absolute leniency. I slowly walked over to the kitchen island, pulling a crisp white envelope from the front pocket of my cardigan. When Aaron graduated from his prestigious law school, I handed him a very large check to cover his initial apartment deposit. I explicitly told him that a true man pays his own way and protects his family from the harshness of the world. He took my money, completely ignored my advice, and actively chose to become a predator instead of a protector. He intentionally forged my signature on federal banking documents to save his own hollow, deeply pathetic personal pride. I placed the white envelope directly onto the kitchen table, sliding it carefully toward his trembling hands. Aaron looked down at the paper, a sudden desperate flash of greedy hope instantly igniting within his bloodshot eyes. He firmly believed I was ultimately capitulating, offering him a massive financial bailout to instantly restore his shattered, fraudulent corporate empire. He desperately reached for the envelope, eagerly ripping the seal open to extract the single piece of paper secured inside. He stared completely blankly at the personal check, his fragile shoulders immediately slumping forward as the tiny printed numbers aggressively destroyed his final deeply pathetic financial illusion today. "That check is written for exactly $2,000, Aaron," I announced, my voice echoing with brutal, unyielding finality throughout the quiet kitchen. "That specific amount will cover a modest security deposit on a very cheap working-class apartment located on the edge of the city. The remaining funds will successfully secure your basic groceries and a monthly bus pass so you can commute to a regular job. It is not an invitation to rebuild your fake aristocratic lifestyle. It is a fundamental, absolute reset. I am effectively handing you the exact same harsh starting line I actually experienced at 20 years old entirely today." Aaron stared in sheer disbelief at the modest sum written across the check. He had confidently expected a massive capital injection, something in the six-figure range, to aggressively fight his impending federal legal battles. $2,000 was less than he used to spend on a single weekend getaway with his incredibly arrogant wife. He looked back up at me, his face twisting into a complex mask of profound disappointment, lingering entitlement, and sheer, undeniable, absolute terror right tonight. "You cannot possibly expect me to survive on this pathetic amount, Dad," Aaron whispered, his voice cracking violently. "I have massive, overwhelming legal fees rapidly approaching. I have to hire a criminal defense attorney to fight the federal forgery indictment you intentionally triggered. I am actively facing aggressive, predatory creditors who want to destroy my life." He was still attempting to shift absolute blame, refusing to accept complete responsibility for his own catastrophic financial crimes. "That check is the last money you will ever receive from me," I stated with cold, unshakable authority. "I will no longer fund your aggressive arrogance or subsidize your absolute disrespect. You will take that money, you will leave my property tonight, and you will learn how to survive entirely on your own merit. You can choose to humbly build yourself back up from absolute rock bottom, or you can choose to fail. It is no longer my problem whatsoever." Aaron looked at my unwavering expression, finally understanding the absolute permanence of his expulsion. He slowly stood up from the wooden chair, carefully clutching the modest check in his trembling fist. He picked up his cheap, wet duffel bag and walked silently back through the hallway. He opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the freezing rain. The heavy latch clicked firmly shut behind him, completely locking him out of our lives forever. 3 months later, the relentless summer heat settled over the city like a heavy woolen blanket. I sat in my air-conditioned home office reviewing the latest legal updates Jonathan had forwarded to my secure server. Aaron was currently working a grueling 12-hour shift as a junior paralegal at a completely underfunded public defender clinic located in the most dangerous district of the city. He spent his days filing mundane motion paperwork for minor offenses. He no longer wore tailored navy suits or flashed a gold smartwatch to intimidate opposing counsel. He rode the public transit bus every single morning, clutching a cheap plastic thermos of burnt coffee while wearing heavily scuffed dress shoes he recently purchased from a local discount outlet. He lived alone in a cramped studio apartment above a noisy laundromat, carefully budgeting his meager hourly wages to strictly cover his basic groceries and his mandatory federal restitution monthly payments. Megan was actively drowning in an absolute nightmare of aggressive civil litigation. Her predatory divorce attorney completely abandoned her case when the judge formally ruled that all her massive consumer debts were strictly marital liabilities she had to personally repay. She was legally forced to attend grueling deposition hearings every Tuesday afternoon, sitting in a damp courthouse basement, while aggressive collection agencies ruthlessly garnished her pathetic minimum wage paychecks. Her wealthy parents entirely refused to cover her rapidly mounting legal fees today. I closed the digital file on my laptop screen, feeling absolutely no remorse for her catastrophic new reality. Megan aggressively attempted to steal my hard-earned wealth to fund her arrogant superiority, and the brutal justice system was actively grinding her into fine dust. She loudly demanded the absolute destruction of my family at that luxury restaurant, and she successfully managed to completely obliterate her own shallow existence instead. The financial reckoning was entirely merciless. I pushed my heavy chair back from the wooden desk and walked slowly through the quiet hallway of our home. The oppressive tension that once choked this house had completely evaporated, leaving behind a profound and absolute tranquility. I opened the front screen door and stepped out onto the wide brick porch. Evelyn was already sitting in her favorite rocking chair, holding a cold glass of iced tea, while she watched the neighborhood children playing happily across the street today. I took the empty seat right beside her and let out a long, satisfied sigh. "You look incredibly peaceful this afternoon." Evelyn, I noted gently, placing my hand softly over hers. She turned to me with a warm, genuine smile that I had not seen since before that disastrous dinner. "I finally feel safe in my own home again." "Eugene," she replied softly, "the heavy storm is completely gone and the air feels clean again today." I squeezed her hand lightly, feeling a massive, invisible weight permanently lift from my tired shoulders. For years, I had anxiously monitored Aaron, making sure his fraudulent life never collapsed onto our doorstep. I actively lived in a constant state of defensive paranoia, always preparing for his next inevitable financial disaster. Now that defensive posture was totally unnecessary. I was no longer a silent hostage to my own misguided generosity, or to his deeply destructive and entitled arrogance today. Evelyn and I spent decades denying ourselves simple pleasures, specifically to ensure our son possessed every conceivable advantage in this harsh world. We skipped our own anniversary trips to pay his expensive fraternity dues, and we drove aging vehicles so he could maintain his pristine credit score. We completely surrendered our own peace of mind to construct a massive safety net for a boy who ultimately used it to hang us. That painful era was permanently finished right now. The massive $8,000 monthly commercial rent subsidy I previously wasted on Aaron was now officially redirected back into my primary holding account. That was nearly $100,000 a year in pure liquid capital that I had actively thrown into a blazing furnace of ungrateful entitlement. I realized that my immense financial power could be utilized to uplift people who actually possessed true integrity and a genuine hunger for success. Our local community was filled with brilliant young black men and women who were desperately fighting for a fraction of the elite opportunities my son casually threw away. I officially contacted Jonathan early last week to aggressively restructure our corporate philanthropic strategy and execute a brand new educational initiative. We legally established the Hayes Vanguard Scholarship Fund, operating directly through my commercial holding company. The trust specifically allocates the exact $8,000 a month that Aaron previously squandered toward fully funding the university tuition of talented, underprivileged youth from my old working-class neighborhood. We actively chose candidates who clearly demonstrated fierce resilience and an unshakable moral compass. I was officially transferring the generational wealth I built on the shipping docks to the next generation of actual hardworking scholars. Yesterday morning, I proudly signed the very first distribution check for a brilliant young black woman heading to medical school. She stood in my attorney office crying tears of absolute gratitude because our immediate financial intervention saved her from crushing predatory student loans. She forcefully shook my hand and firmly promised to return to the local community as a dedicated pediatric surgeon. Aaron never once thanked me for the massive legal empire I secretly handed him on a pristine silver platter. Watching that young student weep with genuine appreciation actively healed a massive bleeding wound in my chest that my son viciously ripped open. Aaron is currently learning the brutal value of an honest dollar while meticulously filing legal documents in a crowded public defender office. He takes the city bus in the pouring rain, and he cooks his own cheap meals in a tiny kitchen. He is no longer shielded by an invisible financial fortress, and he is no longer poisoned by a toxic wife. For the very first time in his entire adult life, my son is actively facing the undeniable truth. I did not destroy my son when I executed the rapid financial freeze. I simply stopped violently interrupting the natural consequences of his own choices. I actively removed the dense fog of artificial arrogance and forcefully restored his baseline reality. He was forced to hit absolute rock bottom so he could finally learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. True love sometimes requires you to completely walk away and let the fire burn out naturally. Evelyn leaned her head gently against my shoulder as we watched the evening sun begin to dip below the neighborhood trees. She took a slow sip of her iced tea and sighed deeply. "We did the right thing, Eugene," she whispered into the warm summer breeze. "Yes, we absolutely did," I replied, wrapping my arm securely around her waist. The brutal financial reckoning was completely finished, and our peaceful home was finally free from his dark, toxic shadow today. The silent adjustment successfully executed its primary objective without a single drop of unnecessary mercy. I utilized my quiet empire to permanently dismantle an arrogant fraud and actively reclaimed the absolute dignity my family fundamentally deserved. The unyielding storm of entitlement was permanently broken, leaving behind an impenetrable fortress of quiet strength. We were finally resting in absolute peace, and nobody would ever dare to disrespect my beautiful wife at a dinner table ever again. The illusion of entitlement. The most profound lesson we can extract from Eugene's journey is that entitlement is a destructive illusion that blinds us to the sacrifices of others. Aaron and Megan believed that luxury and status were their inherent rights, completely forgetting that true privilege is built on the unseen labor and silent endurance of the generations before them. When we demand respect without offering it, and expect financial salvation without demonstrating moral integrity, we actively sever the very roots that sustain us. Eugene teaches us that wealth is not merely a tool for accumulation. It is a sacred responsibility meant to uplift those who show character, not those who demand tribute. Setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary correction to restore reality. By cutting off the financial supply, Eugene did not destroy his son's life. He actively destroyed a toxic fantasy, finally allowing genuine growth to take firm root. Join the conversation. Share your personal story in the comment section below if you ever had to draw a difficult boundary with someone you love to truly protect your own peace. If Eugene's powerful adjustment resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe.